a couple meetings back, we had talked about actually what people could be doing differently to make time for some more of their strategic goals. Okay. And we did have a really long conversation about co-ops. And basically, it was sort of like, um, maybe it's more work than time savings. And there are a lot of states that don't allow purchases off co-ops unless it's NASPO or Value Point. So, but without talking about co-ops for a minute, do you have any material if we in July called it doing it differently instead of just thinking differently? Do you have stories or know people who have stories from their um, ex- experience about doing differently? So it might not necessarily be segment related, but a short story about one little thing or something. What did you stop doing in your organization that you were then able to, I hate this word, but pivot and do something more strategic? Or we need more time to think about it? Valerie, yes.
So we've actually started something kind of new here at the city at the direction of leadership, where people can't just come to procurement with all of their high in the sky projects and have us start working on them. Like we've started a whole system where they have to vet every project that they want to do through leadership before they even make a budget request. And part of the consideration is, and they've actually brought procurement to the table and said, what is the resource requirement or the resource strain that we put on procurement by doing this project? So when they're deciding what should move forward for a budget request, they're actually looking at the level of effort required and the return on investment. And I've given them like benchmarks from some of the benchmark studies in NIGP and others have done about estimated amounts of time based on complexity and what it is. So they can then apply those numbers in their grand matrix. It's called the PIR process, the project intake request process. And part of the matrix they look at is what is the pull on procurement and how do we prioritize considering our time as well, which is kind of nice.
Heck yeah. Dan?
It's funny. I'm going to latch on to something that you said as part of your last statement, which was thinking different so that we could be more strategic. And maybe it's because of my career path and all the circumstances that happened in my past agencies. But truthfully, my thinking differently was to free up operational space. It was to change operations so that we could do the classic more with less or the same with less. It wasn't to, unfortunately, I think I was trapped too much in the operational mindset, and that continues to this day for myself. It's logistics of how the job gets done. It's less about freeing up time to be strategic, unfortunately. So that thinking differently was when, okay, yeah, I lost 75% of my staff in the span of 6 months. What did I have to do differently? And that's where I got creative in how I approached the job. But it was about operation. It wasn't about strategy.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. It doesn't have, it could be strategic operationally. It's just whatever your, you know, and in your case, it was what you had to do versus what you wanted to do, maybe.
Right.
Okay. I like it. If you have an example, one small example would be great. Tara,
Can you hear me?
I can hear ya.
Yay. I'm still in my car, so I don't always know how Zoom works. I think sometimes the struggle with sharing this kind of stuff is what is innovative to one doesn't feel innovative to another because they're in an agency that's been doing it for a while or whatever it might be. But one example that I'm thinking of that we do differently, at least than a lot of other agencies in Arizona, is we created a true series progression for procurement professionals in that every position in my office, every procurement professional position is budgeted at the highest level as a procurement officer senior, but I have the ability to recruit and underfill. So every recruitment that I do at the procurement officer senior level, but I post the 3 job descriptions below it and say that we can hire at this level. And then it's not automatic progression to the next level. It's with my recommendation and if they pass the barrier to move up. And so I've hired plenty of people in as a trainee that the expectation is they're in that role for a year or two. And then once they have 2 years of public procurement experience and they're making progress, I can promote them to a procurement officer. Once they're certified, I can promote them to a procurement officer 2. And then once they've worked in the role and been certified for a few years, we promote them to senior. And so it's just a way to handle the recruitment and retention and truly creating a ladder where I think a lot of organizations might have various roles, but in order to advance, somebody has to leave their role.
Right. That was a great assist by your HR department.
I will say by my county manager. He really created the process for career series. We just put in a budget initiative to say, can we create a series for procurement?
But the fact that you can like post all of them and hire at any level, unless I heard it wrong, is revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people create a progression path because usually my experience is it's because the level at which you were hiring people in and the top end of the salary was just not acceptable anymore. And the progression in this series enabled us to raise salaries. So, but I think that's a great thing to share. And I also think it would give folks a lot of ideas on how they could, get more talent. Now, Valerie, if it doesn't fit, if your office does not have the capacity to do everything at the same time, can you negotiate in those project intake request meetings to pace the work?
So it's all really metric based. I think if I had an issue, I could certainly raise it and say, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, or Z. But one of the things that's actually worked well informally is encouraging my team members to meet regularly with the senior leadership in the departments they support. Because, for example, 2 engineers go to my procurement specialist who supports engineering. And they're in different divisions of engineering. And they're both like, no, my project is a priority. No, my project is a priority. And I told her, that's not your job to decide. That is their boss's job to decide. So just by establishing a cadence with the senior leadership and the departments to say, we're not making this decision. You make the decision. You tell us the priority because it can't be all of these things. It established a good working relationship and also forces the question back to the senior leadership of each department about what really is their priority and what really is most important.
Well, know what battles you can let go of, right? Because that takes a lot of time.
And people were stressing out about things. So I'm like, that's not your job to decide. That is the leader of that department's job to decide.
Absolutely. And
as a contract officer, Val, when I worked as the one contract officer assigned to Public Works, we had that issue all the time too. And so I started doing an on-deck list. And weekly, I would just send a list of, here are the projects I'm working on. here are the projects that are on my radar, but I haven't started anything on. And this is the priority list that I'm currently working on them in. If there's a disagreement on priority, please tell me. And it did so much to address that. You know, you've got 3 different division heads telling you their project is number 1. And like, I agree with you. It's such a good way to push it back and say, like, I can only do so much. So if you want me to rearrange my priorities, just tell me how you want me to rearrange them.
Exactly. And then, when it becomes a battle of departments, then I go, okay, let me go to the city manager. Based on city council priorities, what should we be focusing on? Because this is how many hours in the day there are. It's not an expectation of mine that people regularly work beyond 40 hours a week, even though it happens, as we all know. I just don't want to establish that as the norm or the expectation.
Exactly. This is good, Tara and Valerie. Very good. On deck. That's kind of cool. I do remember, gosh, maybe it's only a year ago, maybe 2, John Walton getting into a situation where he was stressing over priorities. And he finally spoke up to his management and said, look, I make decisions that you can easily change. So why don't you just make the decisions? And it was a huge relief. Huge relief. Valerie, is there a particular metric? I know you said you look at how long these things take. Is there a particular metric that was helpful? Is it in the benchmarking study?
There was, I think, gosh, I'll have to look. I think it was an NIGP benchmarking study that it was like an estimate of 80 to 120 hours for an RFP. And there were just different activities. And then I tried to look at, I used AI's help with this. So Copilot helped me out with how I did this. But what are the actual productive hours of an FTE? And it's not 2080 when you factor in meetings and conferences and training and so forth. So I took that measurement, and then I looked at the level of work we were doing, like how many RFPs are we putting out, how many IFBs are we putting out, and then calculated what's an actual realistic expectation of how many different things each person on our team can produce every year, and taking that into account. So when you come to me with like, here's 5 projects, and we're going to do this other crazy thing that just came out of the blue, we need to have a conversation because the math doesn't math correctly when you look at the metrics.
That is fascinating.
Was it the NCPP study, Valerie?
I think it was the NCPP study. I need to look up my sources here.
Yeah.
If you could share where to find that, would be awesome.
I'll look it up and throw it in the chat when I find it.
Okay. Or, and we had a conversation when we were talking about this last time also. Jack could not join us today, but where Jack said, yeah, this concept of capacity is very big in operations management. And I thought maybe we could have him sort of go into that a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Before we talk about, and I know we're our own worst enemy when it comes to change. In many cases, it's easier to, keep chunking it out versus try something else. So I was just hoping. I mean, this isn't something that would end up in the innovation, part of the forum, but little things you can do differently. So, Keith.
Having trouble finding I just now found it, raise the hand. We actually, when I worked for the city of Tamarack, my last job before retiring, we had actually developed a procedure whereby the city manager required everybody to route their request for an RFP over $50,000 to the city manager, and he would personally approve it. And we developed he told us to develop a form, and he used to be the IT director, so he wanted the workflow automated. So we had an automated workflow process. And Valerie, I sent you a copy of a completed form along with the workflow message that we would get in procurement once the city manager had completed his review and approved it. And if he didn't approve it, the department would get the notice. But it was kind of an innovative process, and it worked very well. And then it kept all that chitter chatter from the departments out of our ears.
Right. Right.
At-
Very good.
In Fort Myers, we actually have what we call our monthly CIP meeting, where it's procurement, engineering, public works, utilities, Parks and Rec, all of the big departments meet with us and the city manager and the assistant city manager and the finance director. And we go through a list of every project that is upcoming or that we're working on and where we are in it and what departments are currently involved with it. And it's been really good way to track things.
I love that. I do. It's beautiful in Atlanta.
It is. I decided I
You're-
needed to be outside walking and not just sitting in the hotel listening to you.
You're beautiful in Atlanta.
Oh, thank
So,
you.
but that is fantastic. I love that you're engaging with management. I'm not saying they don't get involved, but it's not visible to us often.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And more importantly, I don't hear what they say.
Well,
You
we've had to invite ourselves to more and more meetings. And it's just I find somebody who's going to the meeting who will forward me the invitation and I just start showing up.
Okay.
And then they realize it's a good idea to have us there, and when we don't go, they miss us.
Very, very cool. So it's sort of like organic. Tara. Does
I was
CIP
just
yeah.
I-
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think maybe there would be value to talking. Like, I think we all know intrinsically when you get the seat at the table how valuable it is. But maybe it would be, and I struggle because I feel like we get too focused on having the seat that we're not thinking about what value are we bringing to prove that we need the seat. Like, it's not about the seat, it's about what you're doing there. And so as I was thinking through this, like we do every 3 weeks, we do a CIP meeting that's focused on facilities. Every 3 weeks, we do a meeting focused on water infrastructure projects. And then with the ARPA funding, we were doing an ARPA update every 3 weeks. But I was invited by the county manager because he saw the value of procurement. And I think to Denise's point, even if it's that it's not the CIP meeting that you got invited to, but if you get invited to a meeting where there is leadership and decisions are being made, make sure that you show your value in that meeting and what procurement brings that's different from what everyone else around the table is bringing. And then you will start getting whether it's from the person who created the meeting or someone who's attending the meeting saying, hey, I think it would be valuable if you were here because we need to talk about X, Y, Z. I wonder if we talk about something along those lines in a segment is we got to stop thinking that the seat at the table is the important part because we're treating it as a means to an end instead of focusing on the means. And the means are, what is the value that we're bringing in the meetings that we're in?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Valerie, you had a follow-up or an additional comment?
Oh, I was just clapping to what Tara was saying.
Very good. Very good. Well, and as far as CIP is concerned, to get more involved, I took advantage, I will freely admit it, of the fact that my husband was the budget director for the city and his CIP person. Of course, I knew because I knew all the folks he worked with. And so we had a conversation. Hey, did you know that procurement could really use this information well? Because they were soliciting the CIP plans, and nobody was sharing it with anybody. So he's like, sure, because of the relationship. He knew me. He knew I wasn't just trying to, mess with him and all this stuff. So, because realizing that sharing this information takes more time for them, it does take more time for you, but in essence, you get to plan better. How many of you, whether in classes or conversations with your colleague, ever have the conversation about, are you proactive or reactive? What kinds of ways can you be proactive? So, Tara, have a great day. I hear from most that it's reactive. And yes, Valerie.
So I was just thinking about this in terms of being proactive, in terms of advocacy for the profession. So for the first time ever, we did a city proclamation of procurement month. We always just said, well, the state does that. But this year we went to city council, and to my pleasant surprise, council was like, thank you for coming and explaining to the public the value that procurement adds. And then last night, I was watching the council meeting. I wasn't there, but on their own, without my influence or, being in their ear or anything, a couple council members said, I think we're not utilizing procurement as strategically as we should be. And there was this whole discussion about advisory boards and blah, blah, blah. But it was kind of neat. I'm like, I'm glad this is recorded so I can pull it up and roll the film later. But I think when maybe we have an opportunity when there are new people coming on as elected officials to tell our story, to advocate for what procurement does. Because then even if we don't have like where we want to be on the org chart, it's like, oh, but there's still recognized value in what we do. And the people who are elected are now communicating with the residents and their constituents about the value of what we do. I know exactly where I'm going with that, but I think there's an opportunity for advocacy proactively by doing little things like, hey, let's do a proclamation locally for procurement month.
That's fantastic. And I guess a lot of times perhaps we assume they just organically know this, or we know that they don't know it. Good that you took advantage of that. Bobby, you have a comment?
Yes, I'd like to share a story. Or I left Harford County Public Schools and we got a new school board. I actually asked if I could get in front of them to do a presentation to talk about procurement and what our limits are and how the procurement department works. And to your point, when things would go to them, they would ask, like, do we have a report from procurement? Did this go through procurement? So they would actually start to ask, and we created a whole new board report for them to show that things had gone through procurement. I had my own section in there to talk about the process a little bit. So you're right. If you have the opportunity to get in front of them in the beginning, that really helps. And some of the other departments were a little upset because they required presentations from other departments as well. So it kind of set the stage for others to have to do the same thing. So I was kind of happy that I set the tone and kind of got it out of the way first.
Excellent. And just out of curiosity, because I'm always hearing about the attention span of leadership. How did you determine how long to do the presentation? How long did it run?
So that was a question that I asked, and they gave me, I think, like 5 or 10 minutes or something
Okay.
on the actual agenda. And that was more than enough time. I was like, nothing more than 10 minutes because I didn't want them to have questions to ask. I just wanted to do a presentation and kind of get out of there because I've learned the longer you're there, they start to think of questions to ask. So I kind of wanted to get in and out of there. So I don't think it was more than 10 minutes, about
Right.
10 slides.
And so you were not anticipating, and you planned for not the deeper dive with council, just the you know, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it gets crazy if you don't have actual stuff to talk about and you get the what ifs.
Yes.
I agree. I agree. Dan,
It's funny. This isn't why I raised my hand, but going off of what Bobby's talking about, I was fortunate over my career at my last city to spend time with my council and become trusted by them, and even be in sessions where, yeah, I was standing in front of them for a half hour talking about procurement code and changes that we wanted to make and changes that they were interested in making and concepts around preferences. And I remember specifically using the phrase with one council member when he says, "Well, can we do it this way?" And I looked at him directly and said, "Well, technically that'd be illegal. No." Um, and being able to be that blunt with them was refreshing. But what I wanted to say, and the reason I raised my hand, is I've always looked at this group, the group on this call, in this meeting, doing this activity, as leaders in our profession. And I've always looked to people in this group and in similar veins as those that are exhibiting best practices. One thing that has enlightened me since my time at Sourcewell is in my interaction with other agencies, I've started to use the phrase, they're at a different point on the evolutionary scale. Okay. They may know what best practices are, but because of political will or a shyness of getting in front of their councils or the powers that be to affect change, they're just not there yet. And we can speak all day about, well, this is what you should be doing. Well, that's nice, and I'm fully aware of that, but I don't have the power to make that happen yet. And it's startling to me how much of a span or how much of a difference there is from very base level stuff to those that are just hyper progressive and out there in front of their councils and able to do those sort of things. And we are really all over the map, and there is not a homogenous purchasing agent within our profession. There really isn't. You spoke earlier about professional services being off of your docket, and I had that case a couple cities ago. I didn't deal with professional services or capital construction. So our lane was very narrow in terms of what purchasing did. But I've been in shops that did both of those as well. Everyone's different. You talked about cooperatives and funny things around cooperatives. There is actual municipal code on the book specifically calls out Omnia, Sourcewell, NASPO, and a few others as cooperatives they absolutely will not use. They've got to change law for them to deliberately use us. And you wonder about how that came about. We have no idea. But I have that piece of paper in my files as just one extreme on how the profession is addressed. Everybody's different. There's a lot of us out there. There's 30,000 public agents in the US. We're not going to be able to hit all of them at the same time with the same message and expect traction.
excellent. And you got a comment from Valerie too. Thank you, Val. Don.
Great points about the evolution. That's one thing I've noticed over the years is that while we can talk about some really progressive things in this group, a lot of the people that are practicing or trying to practice aren't even close to that. So I started thinking, okay, at one point I was on a first name basis with some of the key legislators in the state. Whenever there was a purchasing law being proposed, they would call me over and ask me to present, talk to the committee about it.
Same.
And I had to keep asking myself, how did I get to that point? Valerie, how did you get to the point where you can go and talk to the city manager and have ideas? How did any of you get to the point where you've got influence at the table? Because if we could go back in time and figure out what were the steps we took to get there, what were the first steps, what were the baby steps that started us towards that path, those are the kind of things we could be teaching or talking to the newbies, the people early on. Because if we go to forum and talk about, well, you need to go to your legislature and get them to change the laws, they're going to look at you like, well, how do I do that? But how do you get to that point where you can take those baby steps? I'm not sure. I don't remember. I'm too old.
Well, and that'll vary regionally and on the experience of those in the seats. I came from California where you didn't have a seat at the table with the legislature unless you had a lot of lobbying money in your pocket. You didn't enter the building. And I moved over to Nevada where there's law on the books that calls out the Nevada Public Purchasing Study Commission, which is comprised of purchasing agents of every public agency in the state. And they are there for the purpose of advising the legislature on matters of public procurement. So as bills would come up, they would look our direction saying, okay, yeah, what do you think? It was kind of cool. And it was really a case where a bill would pop up and say, who can go down to Carson City in the next half hour to go testify? It was just that easy. Didn't have to sign it as a lobbyist. You just said, this is what I represent. This is what we think.
That's amazing. Bobby or Victor? Bobby.
Yes. So, Don, for me, I think it started when I received my CPPO, right? Having obtained my certification and having those initials behind my name gave some credence to what I was saying. And I came across as the subject matter expert. This is my area of expertise. I learned what our policies and procedures were so that I could have a conversation about it, because in procurement, the only thing that we really have is what's in those four corners, right? So having them to understand the importance of having me on staff as the subject matter expert. I always love to teach, so I would always try to find an opportunity to teach, to show them the value of procurement, but to get them involved. If there were policies or procedures that changed, taking the opportunity to get on the agenda to talk about it. But that comes from having some of your own courage, right? It takes courage to stand up and talk in front of people. It takes courage to be able to say what you mean in a way that's not offensive, but you're coming across as the person that I know what I'm talking about. So a lot of people don't have that self-confidence, although they may know the material, but having the self-confidence to stand in front of people and make a case for whatever it is that you want. And having experience with multiple agencies, for me, I think helped, because I could draw on experience from those different agencies and then come across as a subject matter expert is saying, well, I tried this here and it worked. I like to try it here. So using some of those previous experiences, I think helped as well.
Yeah, and then just to follow up on that, following the progression of the conversations and going back to your original question, Barb, are we reactive or proactive? I think, as everyone has said and Bobby just said, we're reactive at first because we don't know anything better. And Don, I totally agree with you that we're showing with these conversations and the Radio NIGP show, you know, to quote the Mandalorian, this is the way. We're teaching all the young ones, experience-wise, not age-wise. This is the way. This is the, try this. So then, when you forget that, 2 months ahead, you need to send a request for a proclamation for procurement month, and you go the week before, and you're like, oh, next year. I'm writing it in January, so we get it by March. It's just the more we talk about these issues and the more we say, oh, we tried this, the more people get the tools in their tool belt, that instead of just wearing the tool belt, they have that huge, Sears red tool chest. It's like, oh, you're doing that. Well, you need this special tool. I didn't know you had a special tool. Well, you can borrow my tool. Just give it back when you're done. And then Dan's going on a strike, apparently.
Was that a bowling pin?
Yeah, it's one of my fidget spinners in my office. Just once in a while, I just need to grab onto something.
That's great. And that's, that is a great view also. I love this idea about talking about, like Bobby said, the confidence and really demonstrating that you have the confidence. And I mentioned that Denise, and I think obviously Carrie Mathis and others of you have taken pictures with your council members, posted them on LinkedIn or Facebook, and said, hey, we got the AEP. And which, that's really exciting. And we're not used to tooting our own horn. So I'm loving hearing about this. Let me just tell you. And especially the the idea that Denise had that you show up at the meeting as if you were, as if you belong there because you do.
We just got a new summer intern this week, and I told him when I go to meetings that I maybe hadn't been invited to before, I must listen, I must be present, I must contribute. Otherwise, I might not get that invitation again. So the importance of being present when you're invited to the table is key.
And we have to recognize that our contribution won't always be positive either. I joke in my own family, kids should make t-shirts, dad's the killer of dreams. And very often in procurement, it was the same way. I'm sorry, you can't do that because. And I lean back on a Disney book, actually. Walt didn't like the word no because it was always called because you can't, because of this and this. And so the guy that did all his feasibility studies learned early on, I always said yes, if. Yeah, you can do that if you get the law changed, if you make this effect happen, if you do this and this. But even our interactions with elected officials, the same council member that I called out who had the idea that was illegal, in a subsequent meeting around a bid protest, he really leaned into me hard in public, was looking to embarrass me. And I found myself falling back in a phrase that I still recall to this day that said, "It's no excuse, but it is the reason." This is how it went down. Sorry it went down that way. It's no excuse, but it's the reason it happened.
Right.
And standing up to him in that way, he was that council member that liked to embarrass staff, not just purchasing. He did that to everybody. But being able to do that to him in a public session in front of 5 other council members endeared me more to them than anything. And I wasn't seeking to do it, but in the moment, it just was a moment of clarity.
Exactly. Sometimes those words don't come to us
Yes.
fast enough. That's a great phrase. Because that's
Yeah, and to me, it was a situation where, of course, I could have done it better. Yeah, I could have read that document one more time and avoided this whole thing, but I didn't. I've learned for the future. Sorry, you had to go through this.
right.
I fell on the sword in front of the group. It was fine.
Well, and I'm going to bring in this because of you and Bobby and everybody. This, it's your authenticity. You don't have to be, flawless, but you have to be authentic and trustworthy. And that is quite a career advancer. I'm sorry that person did like to embarrass people. Because it's uncomfortable I just think it's reflects on them and it makes it uncomfortable for everybody. On the other hand, you handled it with grace and no rancor and not defensively. So kudos.
In my experience, there's one of those on every elected board. There's someone that always thinks that they are much better informed or know how to do the job better than their staff does.
Right.
And unfortunately, the staff learned quickly, okay, that's the person I need to write my staff report around. That's who I need to write my presentation around. And so they're catering to an audience of one out of an elected body of 5 or 7 or 9, whatever it may be. And it's frustrating because not everyone is necessarily hearing what they need to hear.
Understood. And I'm watching our faces and I see several people who actually had a poster child in mind for what you were describing.
Always at least one.
You're right.
Yes, I was going to say, Dan, you're absolutely right. Every job I've had at least one. And I'm going to add this, and I have to run. When I became an NIGP instructor, the person that I reported that to the board. So they were oh so proud to have an instructor as their procurement person. And I think that gave me some credit to where they didn't ask me as many questions that kind of validated my experience, so to speak. So I was kind of happy about that.
That's fantastic. And you have a great day. I didn't even realize
You all too.
Thanks.
Bye.
And we'll talk. Wow.